Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alina from Creative Field Designs, and today I'm going to teach you how to paint these simple watercolor blueberries. This is a perfect background for your lettering or calligraphy, so I really hope you enjoy it. Let's begin. For this tutorial, we'll be using a watercolor paper. So I'm using a Kanzen mixed media paper. I really like its surface and it has a very nice smooth texture, but feel free to use any watercolor paper you have. We'll need a variety of brushes. You don't have to have as many, but it's good to have a big one, medium one and a very fine one. We'll need some water for mixing our paints, a bit of tissue paper, and our mixing palette. You can also just use a white ceramic plate if you don't have a mixing palette like this. The first thing we're going to do is use our pencil and very lightly sketch in the layout of our design. So I'm just starting with this branch and adding some clusters of blueberries. Clusters of 3 or 4 usually work really well. And then I'm just going to try and imagine how the leaves grow out of them. I find it quite hard to imagine actually, so as I've done this before, I know what I'm doing, but sometimes I find it's easier to refer to a real photo, or if you're painting flowers or anything like that, sometimes just referring to a real flower is so much easier. For the middle of your berry, try to draw this little star shape, and for the top, we just want to have some fine strokes coming out of it. Try to position them in different angles so they're not facing the same direction. So I'm going to start mixing up my paint. So we'll be using blue paint. So I'm just blending in some navy, some blue, some very light blue, and I've added a little bit of red as well. So mixing up your paints like this is going to achieve a very nice unique tone. And then just load up your brush with paint, and we're going to start painting each berry. I usually like to go with a circle shape first and then color it in. Feel free to blend in a darker shade of blue as you go. Make sure you have enough water in your brush. We don't want to create puddles of water, but having enough water for the color to blend is very important. If you feel like you have too much water, just dry off your brush on a tissue paper and go back in with a very dry brush to remove the excess water. So doing these very sort of small dabbing motions is the best thing to do, as you want to blend your paints evenly. And adding in different tones will make your berry look more interesting. So don't feel like you need to stick with one colour. Maybe blend in a little bit of navy or lighter shade blue, or even a bit of purple. You can also leave a few white areas for highlights. Try keeping your blueberry very round. And try to make the bottom of your blueberry a bit darker. You can always use a bigger brush to blend your paints. Just go in with a dry brush and just move that paint along the berry. Next thing we are going to do is wait for those berries to dry, as some of them are on top of one another, so we just need to wait for these to dry up a little bit. So we're going to do our branch, and I've just mixed up a bit of brown and red to make it a bit warmer, and I'm just starting to paint this in with my very fine brush. Very long movements using the tip of your brush. Adding in more water, let it blend better. Again, doing the outline first and just filling in, colouring in the stem. We're going to go back in with our big brush and mix up a bit of green to do our leaves. And we're going to do our leaves with a big brush and use the belly of the brush and try to flatten it to create the body of the leaf, and then use the tip of the brush to correct the shape of each leaf, just like this. Using the tip of the brush for the stem and using the body of the brush for the actual leaf, and correcting it as you go. Again, feel free to blend in some different green, maybe add in some brown or add in a little bit of purple or add in a bit of red, just a tiny bit, to either tone down your colour or just make it a bit warmer. I'm just going in with a much lighter green. There won't be two identical leaves in nature, so we're just trying to do the same thing. Make them vary as much as we can. Remember, watercolour looks lighter when it dries. That's something to bear in mind. I'm trying to do our two halves separately, so starting with one side and then going back to our stem and just flattening that brush once again. Or just doing the shape of the leaf first and then colouring it in. Try both and see if it feels best. Sometimes doing one motion leaf is nicer, but if you really want to keep that leafy shape, the best thing to do is just use the tip of the brush first. So once your leaves are drying, we're going to go back in to do our blueberries. So very carefully, try not to touch the ones we've painted already. We're just going to do the same thing once again, and I'm going in with a lighter blue. Really trying to keep that round shape. I'm going to make this one very watery. So when it dries, it will look very transparent. I'm going darker around the edges once again, adding more colour there. Just keeping those movements very light and using the tip of our brush mainly. So I'm going to start painting the top of the blueberry, and I want to use a dark colour. If you realise that your blueberries weren't quite dry and maybe two of them will bleed together like this, so the best thing to do is just use a dry brush, go back in and we're going to fix it. So I'm just using my brush to create this little highlight. Let's add in some detail for our leaves. Again, we're leaving those blueberries to dry just to finish off with the last one. I'm just adding a bit of a detail in each leaf, doing the middle and the sides with this very fine brush. Very light movements, barely touching the page. So very quickly I'm just making these very thin strokes. Again, just drying off this leaf, but there was a bit too much water there. So using a darker shade green and having quite a lot of paint on your brush instead of a very watery, diluted paint is the way to go. Just doing our last blueberry, being very mindful of the other two as we don't want them to blend together. We really want to keep that round shape of each berry. And I'm going to do this very lightly again, just so it looks a bit different from the other three. So that's the body of our blueberry. Next thing we're going to do is add in some detail. Use the tip of the brush to round up those shapes as best as you can. And I'm just blending some very dark blue here. So I've added a bit of green, a bit of navy, a bit of blue. Then we have this very nice colour, and we're going to add in some shadow at the bottom of each berry. And using the small brush and just dabbing that brush, adding some detail, correcting that shape. If it's a bit too dry, feel free to add in a bit more water so it blends nicer. So I'm just adding in paint first and then just adding some water and blend it all together. And once it dries, it'll just look like a little layer on top. Just play with the tip of your brush, correct any imperfections. Just making sure we have nice circles there. If your blueberries are a bit too wet to work with, just give it a second. It's quite a time-consuming process as we always need to wait for the berries to dry to add in some detail. And then we're going to add in these starry shapes either on top or in the middle of the berry. On top, I'm just doing a few fine strokes like this. Almost looks like a little onion. And then in the middle, I'm just doing the starry shape with a darker blue. So these are facing towards us, and some of them are facing down, some of them are facing to the left, so it just looks very nice. So this one's a bit wet, so I've just blended some darker blue. And I realised that I would like to add in some more leaves. I'm going to work with my medium brush and just add in some lighter leaves. Sometimes you'll realise that your composition is lacking something, and it's a good opportunity to just add in some more details, and greenery always looks very nice. We could even add in more leaves if you wanted to. maybe making some of them a bit smaller, just to keep it interesting. And once they dry, only when they dry, we're going to go in with our fine tip and add in some darker detail as before. I'm not happy with this berry, so I'm just adding a bit more paint in it. It just created this very big highlight. So again, just go back in and correct any imperfections, correct the detail in your leaves, or make your top of the berry or starry shapes a bit darker. Sometimes it might take a few layers before you see this. So hope you enjoyed it and hope it was useful. I would love to see your work. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and let me know how you get on in comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to see my future videos. And thanks so much for watching this.